I thought I had found the perfect partner, someone who celebrated my passion for writing and encouraged my dreams. But over time, his support turned into control, and I began to lose not only my voice but also my sense of self. Today, I'll share how I broke free from a relationship that silenced me and found the courage to reclaim my identity. Will I rediscover the writer I once was? If you've ever felt trapped in someone else's shadow, like this video and subscribe for more stories of resilience and self-discovery. The cursor blinked relentlessly on the blank document, mocking my inability to string together even a single sentence. I sat at my writing desk, bathed in the soft glow of my desk lamp, its warm light a stark contrast to the cold dread creeping up my spine. The gentle hum of my computer seemed to grow louder with each passing second, filling the silence of our spacious study. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as I attempted to type. The soft click of each key echoed in the room, each sound a painful reminder of my struggle. I could almost hear Peter's voice, cutting through the quiet of the night. "Laura, darling, are you still working on that silly little story? You know it's not going anywhere." His words, though not physically present, rang in my ears as clearly as if he were standing right behind me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the memory, but it clung to me like a shadow. "You're wasting your time, sweetheart. Why don't you focus on something more appropriate for a politician's wife?" I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. The faint scent of old books and leather from Peter's collection filled my nostrils, a smell that once brought comfort but now felt suffocating. The ticking of the antique clock on the mantel seemed to grow louder, each second a reminder of the words I couldn't write, the story I couldn't tell. My gaze drifted to the window, where I could see my reflection staring back at me. The woman in the glass looked tired, her eyes holding a weariness that seemed to have settled into her very bones. I hardly recognized myself anymore. Just as I was about to give up and close my laptop, a soft ping broke through the oppressive silence. An email notification. Normally, I would ignore it, but something compelled me to check. It was from the online support group I had hesitantly joined a few weeks ago, hidden under a pseudonym. My heart raced as I opened the message, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face in the dimly lit room. As I read, my breath caught in my throat. It was a story, achingly familiar, from a woman named Sarah. Her words could have been my own, the subtle criticisms, the isolation, the constant doubt. But there was something else in her story. Something I had been missing: hope, determination, a fire that I thought had long been extinguished in me. My fingers moved of their own accord, hovering over the reply button. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of courage ignite within me. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to tell my story. Not just for me, but for Sarah, and for all the other women out there who might be living the same nightmare. With a deep breath, I began to type, the words flowing more freely than they had in years. The room around me faded away, and for once, Peter's voice in my head was silent. All I could hear was the steady rhythm of my fingers on the keyboard, each keystroke a small act of defiance against the silence that had held me captive for so long. I didn't know where this path would lead me, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being quiet. It was time to find my voice again. As my fingers danced across the keyboard, memories flooded back, transporting me to a time that felt like a lifetime ago. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to revisit the beginning of my relationship with Peter, when everything seemed bathed in a golden light of possibility. We met at a literary festival, where Peter's charisma and passion for the arts captivated me instantly. His words resonated with me, igniting a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. "Literature has the power to change the world," he'd said, his blue eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me. "We need more voices, more stories that challenge and inspire." Later, when we were introduced, he took my hand in his touch gentle yet electrifying. "Laura, I hear you're a writer," he said, his smile warm and encouraging. "I'd love to hear about your work." I was captivated. Here was a man who not only understood my passion but seemed genuinely interested in nurturing it. Our courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual discussions, shared dreams, and promises of a future where we'd support each other's ambitions. "Your stories matter, Laura," Peter would say, his arm around me as we'd walk through the park. "I can't wait to see your name on bookshelves everywhere." I felt seen, understood, valued. Peter wasn't just a romantic partner. He was my cheerleader, my confidant, my rock, or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see the subtle shifts, the small moments where admiration began to morph into something else. It started innocently enough, with gentle suggestions about my writing. Peter often offered advice on my writing, his words seemingly thoughtful but subtly undermining. "Why don't you try something simpler?" he'd suggest, his tone soft but cutting deep. At first, I was grateful for his input. After all, Peter was well-read and connected in influential circles. Surely, his advice could only help me grow as a writer. I didn't notice how gradually, his suggestions became more frequent, more insistent. "Laura love, perhaps this plot is a bit ambitious for your first novel," he said one evening, his tone soft but his words cutting deep. "Why don't you start with something simpler?" "I only want to protect you from disappointment," I nodded, pushing down the flicker of doubt that threatened to surface. Peter knew best, didn't he? He was only looking out for me, trying to guide me in a world he understood far better than I did. Even when he began to question the time I spent writing, I made excuses for him. "You've been at that computer for hours, sweetheart. Don't you think it's time for a break?" He'd say, massaging my shoulders. "Come, let's go out. You need to live a little to have something to write about." I'd smile, closing my laptop, telling myself how lucky I was to have someone who cared so much about my well-being. I was naive, blinded by love and the promise of a dream come true. "We're a team, Laura," Peter would say, pulling me close. "Together, we'll conquer the world," and I believed him. With every fiber of my being, I believed that Peter Collins was my soulmate, my partner in every sense of the word. How could I have known then that the man who promised to help me find my voice would be the one to silence it? As I sit here now, years later, staring at the words I've just typed, I can't help but feel a mix of sadness and anger at my younger self. But there's something else too, a glimmer of the hope and determination I once felt. Perhaps it's not too late to reclaim that part of me, to find the voice I lost along the way. With a deep breath, I continue typing, ready to confront the next chapter of my story. As I delve deeper into my memories, the subtle shifts in our relationship become more apparent. What once felt like love and protection slowly morphed into something more sinister, a gradual tightening of invisible chains. I remember the first time Peter suggested I skip my weekly coffee meetup with my writing group. "Darling," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "you know how delicate my position is. We can't risk you accidentally sharing something that could be misconstrued." At first, I protested, but Peter's arguments were always so logical, so concerned for our well-being. "It's just temporary," I told myself, ignoring the pang of loss as I messaged my apologies to the group. Temporary turned into permanent. One by one, my connections to the outside world began to fray. Calls from friends went unanswered, and family gatherings became rare, replaced by Peter's endless demands for appearances at political events. "It's part of being a politician's wife," I'd rationalize, forcing a smile as I stood by Peter's side at yet another fundraiser, my words carefully measured, my opinions muted. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something wasn't right. I'd push it aside, focusing instead on the greater good. "Peter's work is important," I'd tell myself. "He's making a difference in the world, my sacrifices are worth it," yet, there were moments when doubt would creep in, impossible to ignore. Like the night I found an old notebook filled with story ideas, dust-covered and forgotten in a drawer. As I flipped through the pages, tears welled up in my eyes. When was the last time I'd written anything for myself? "Laura," Peter's voice startled me, "what are you doing?" I quickly shoved the notebook back in the drawer. "Nothing, just organizing," I lied, hating myself for the deception but fearing his reaction more. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Don't forget we have the charity gala tomorrow. I've laid out a dress for you, the blue one. It photographs well." As he left the room, I felt a wave of resentment wash over me. But just as quickly, guilt followed. Peter worked so hard, carried so much responsibility. Who was I to complain about a dress? Still, the doubts lingered. At night, lying awake beside Peter's sleeping form, I'd wonder what had happened to the passionate, supportive man I'd fallen in love with. Had he changed, or had I just been blind to who he really was? But in the light of day, I dismissed these thoughts. Relationships evolve, I told myself, this is just a phase. Things will get better once Peter's career stabilizes. I became an expert at silencing my own voice, not just in public but in my own mind. It was easier that way, easier to maintain the facade of the perfect political couple. And yet, with each compromise, each swallowed word, I felt a piece of myself slip away. There were rare moments of rebellion. Once, I snuck out to a bookstore, losing myself in the aisles, fingering the spines of novels I once dreamed of writing. For a brief, glorious hour, I felt like myself again. But as I returned home, Peter was waiting, his face a mask of concern and disappointment. "Where were you?" I was worried sick. "You know how it looks when you disappear like that." The guilt was overwhelming. How could I have been so selfish? "I'm sorry," I whispered, the weight of my transgression heavy on my shoulders. That night, as Peter held me close, murmuring about how much he needed me, how lost he'd be without me, I pushed away the last lingering doubts. This was love, wasn't it? This was what I had signed up for when I married him. But as I drifted off to sleep, a small part of me, the part that still remembered the feel of a pen in my hand and the joy of creating worlds with words, cried out in silent protest. How long could I keep ignoring that voice? How long before it faded away completely? Little did I know, the answer to that question would come sooner than I ever expected, bringing with it a storm that would shake the very foundations of the life I had so carefully constructed. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the darkened study as I scrolled through the online support group's forum. It was late, and Peter was away at a conference, a rare moment of solitude that I both cherished and feared. My finger hovered over the trackpad, hesitating before clicking on a new post titled "The Silence That Screams." As I read, my heart began to race. The words on the screen could have been plucked from my own mind. The gradual isolation, the subtle criticisms disguised as concern, the constant self-doubt. The author, using the pseudonym Phoenix Rising, described her journey from a vibrant, ambitious woman to a shadow of her former self, living in fear of disappointing her controlling partner. Tears streamed down my face as I reached the end of her story. But it wasn't just sadness I felt. There was something else, something I hadn't experienced in years: recognition. For the first time in so long, I felt seen, understood. My fingers trembled as I moved to reply, but I stopped short. What if Peter found out? What if this somehow got back to him? The familiar tendrils of fear wrapped around my heart, constricting it. But then, almost of their own volition, my hands returned to the keyboard. I began to type, haltingly at first, then with increasing speed and urgency. I poured out my story, our whirlwind romance, the gradual erosion of my independence, the suffocating silence that had become my constant companion. As I wrote, it was as if a dam had broken, years of suppressed emotions and unspoken truths flooded out. I felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. This was wrong, wasn't it? I was betraying Peter's trust, airing our private life to strangers. I should delete it all, pretend it never happened. My cursor hovered over the post button. My heart pounded in my ears. What would people think? What if someone recognized our story? What if Peter found out? But another voice, one I had almost forgotten existed, whispered from deep within me, "What if you stay silent forever?" That thought terrified me more than any potential consequences. With a shaky breath, I clicked post. The response was almost immediate. Comments flooded in, filled with empathy, support, and encouragement. Women, and some men, shared their own stories, thanked me for my bravery, urged me to keep writing. "Your words gave voice to my experience," one comment read. "Please don't stop. We need to hear this." Over the next few days, I found myself drawn back to my laptop whenever I had a moment alone. I started a document, titling it simply "My Truth." The words flowed easier now, as if they had been waiting all this time to be released. I wrote about the first time I met Peter, the intoxicating whirlwind of our courtship. I described the subtle ways he had chipped away at my confidence, always under the guise of love and protection. I poured out my fears, my doubts, my desperate longing for the woman I used to be. With each word I typed, I felt a little stronger, a little more like myself. The online group became my lifeline, offering support and validation when doubts crept in. "You're so brave," one member wrote. "Your story could help so many others." But even as I found solace in writing and connecting with others, fear remained my constant companion. Every time I heard Peter's key in the lock, I would quickly close my laptop, my heart racing. I lived in constant dread of discovery, yet I couldn't stop. The need to express my truth had become as essential as breathing. One night, as I reread what I had written, a realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a story. This was my life, and if I didn't do something, it would be my future too. The thought was terrifying. Leave Peter? The man I had loved, the life I had built, it seemed impossible. Yet for the first time in years, another possibility seemed equally impossible, staying silent. I sat back in my chair, my mind whirling with conflicting emotions. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing with certainty. I had found my voice again. And this time, I wouldn't let it be silenced. With trembling fingers, I opened a new document and began to type, Chapter 1, the day I decided to leave. The journey ahead was uncertain and frightening, but as I looked at those words on the screen, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, hope. Whatever happened next, I knew I was no longer alone. My story, our story, would be told. The day I decided to confront Peter dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my head, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. Peter was in his study, poring over some documents when I entered. He looked up, his face softening into the smile that had once made my heart flutter. Now, it only tightened the knot in my stomach. Peter, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, we need to talk. He leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. What is it, darling? Is everything all right? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. No, Peter, everything is not all right. It hasn't been for a long time. His expression changed, concern mixing with confusion. What do you mean, Laura? What's going on? The words tumbled out, years of suppressed feelings and thoughts pouring forth like a flood. I told him about the loneliness, the constant fear of disappointing him, the gradual erosion of my identity. And then, with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest, I told him about my writing. I've been working on a book, Peter, my memoirs. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as confusion gave way to understanding, and then to anger. You've been writing about us, about me? His voice was low, dangerous. Laura, do you have any idea what this could do to my career? To our life. I flinched at his words, but stood my ground. This isn't about your career, Peter, it's about me. About who I used to be, and who I want to be again. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't publish this, I won't allow it. Those words, so familiar in their commanding tone, ignited something within me. You won't allow it, Peter? Do you hear yourself? This is exactly why I need to do this. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. As I spoke, I felt a curious mix of terror and exhilaration. My mind raced with all the potential consequences of my actions. What if Peter used his influence to discredit me? What if no one believed my story? What if I was making a terrible mistake? But alongside these fears, another feeling was growing stronger, hope. Hope for a future where I could speak my truth without fear. Hope for a life where I could be myself, wholly and unapologetically. You're being ridiculous, Peter snapped. You'd throw everything away for some silly dream of being a writer? His words stung, but they only strengthened my resolve. I'm not asking for permission, I replied calmly, I'm taking back my life. This man, who I had once thought was my greatest supporter, had become my biggest obstacle. And I realized, with startling clarity, that I was ready to overcome it. I'm not throwing anything away, Peter, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm reclaiming my life, my voice, and if you can't support that then I can't stay. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. Peter stared at me, disbelief etched across his features. You can't be serious. Where would you go? What would you do? You need me, Laura. But as I looked at him, I realized something profound. I didn't need him. Not anymore. What I needed was to be true to myself, to the woman I had buried for so long. I'm leaving, Peter, I said, surprised by the calmness in my voice. I've already packed my things. I'm going to stay with my sister while I finish my book. He tried to argue, to persuade me, alternating between anger and pleading. But for the first time in years, his words didn't sway me. I had made my decision. As I walked out of his study, out of our house, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Yes, the road ahead was uncertain. Yes, there would be challenges and doubts. But I was no longer alone. I had found my tribe in the women who had shared their stories, who had encouraged me to find my voice. I thought of all the other women out there, trapped in silence, believing they were alone. My story could be their lifeline, just as others' stories had been mine. This realization filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Stepping into the sunlight, I took a deep breath. The air felt different somehow, full of possibility. I was Laura Evans, writer, survivor, and for the first time in too long, I was free. As I drove away, my manuscript safely tucked in my bag, I felt a mix of fear and excitement for what lay ahead. But one thing was certain, my silence had ended. It was time for my voice to be heard. The small apartment felt worlds away from the sprawling house I had shared with Peter. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating boxes yet to be unpacked and walls waiting to be filled with new memories. I stood in the center of what would be my writing nook, breathing in the possibility that hung in the air. My fingers trailed over the second-hand desk I had bought, my first independent purchase in years. It wasn't sleek or expensive like the one in Peter's study, but it was mine. Every scratch and imperfection told a story, much like the one I was about to write. As I set up my laptop, a mixture of excitement and trepidation washed over me. The blank document stared back, both inviting and intimidating. Where do I begin? How do I put into words the complex tapestry of emotions and experiences that led me here? The first few weeks were a roller coaster. There were moments of exhilarating freedom, like the day I joined a local writing group, my voice shaky but growing stronger as I shared a piece of my work. The supportive nods and understanding smiles from the other members warmed me from the inside out. But there were also nights when doubt crept in like a thief, stealing my peace. What if I had made a mistake? What if I wasn't strong enough to make it on my own? The silence of the apartment, once a refuge, sometimes felt oppressive in these moments. Financial worries gnawed at me. I had some savings, but they wouldn't last forever. The prospect of finding a job after years out of the workforce was daunting. Each rejection letter felt like a confirmation of Peter's words, that I needed him, that I couldn't make it on my own. Yet, with each challenge, I found reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. I remembered the women from the online support group, their stories of resilience and triumph. If they could do it, so could I. Small victories became my lifeline. The day I successfully negotiated a lower rent with my landlord, I felt a surge of pride. When I sold my first freelance article, a small piece for a local magazine, I celebrated with a bottle of wine and a long call with my sister, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. My book took shape word by word, page by page. Some days the words flowed easily, cathartic and healing. Other days, revisiting painful memories left me drained and raw. But I kept going, driven by the knowledge that my story could be a beacon for others still trapped in silence. One morning, about 3 months after leaving Peter, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about him in days. The realization hit me like a wave. I was moving on. I was healing. As I sat at my desk that day, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the Laura who had entered that marriage, bright-eyed, in love, full of dreams. I thought about the Laura who had left, beaten down, silenced, a shadow of herself. And I looked at the Laura I was becoming, scarred but stronger, finding her voice again. I opened my laptop and began to write. There's a strength in all of us that we don't realize until we're tested. It's a quiet power, often buried under years of self-doubt and others' expectations. But it's there, waiting to be awakened. My journey isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning. But I've learned that my voice matters, my story matters. And if by sharing it, I can help even one person find their own strength, then every tear, every doubt, every moment of fear will have been worth it. To anyone reading this who feels trapped, silenced, or alone, you are stronger, and you know, your voice deserves to be heard. And there is a whole community of survivors out here, waiting to welcome you with open arms. As I typed the last word, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was still uncertain, full of challenges I had yet to face. But for the first time in years, I was excited about the future. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, armed with the most powerful weapon I possessed, my voice. I saved the document, a smile playing on my lips. This wasn't just a book anymore. It was a testament to resilience, a beacon of hope, and the beginning of a new chapter in my life. And I couldn't wait to see where this story would lead. As I sit here, putting the final touches on my memoir, I can't help but marvel at the journey that has brought me to this moment. The path from silence to self-discovery has been arduous, but infinitely rewarding. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that our voices are our most powerful tools for change, both within ourselves and in the world around us. To you, dear reader, I extend an invitation. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Have you ever felt silenced, diminished, or trapped in a situation that slowly eroded your sense of self? Perhaps you've witnessed a friend or loved one struggling in silence, unsure of how to help. The truth is, emotional abuse is insidious. It creeps in slowly, disguised as love, concern, or protection. But recognizing it is the first step towards reclaiming your power. Your story, your experiences, your voice, they all matter. I'd like to ask you, have you ever faced a situation where you felt your voice was being stifled? How did you find the strength to speak up, to make a change? Or if you're still in that place of silence, what's holding you back? Your experiences, your struggles, and your triumphs are unique and valuable. By sharing them, you not only liberate yourself but also extend a lifeline to others who might be feeling alone in their struggles. If my story has resonated with you, I urge you to take action. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Engage in conversations about emotional abuse and the importance of maintaining one's identity in relationships. And if you're in a position to do so safely, speak your truth, whether through writing, art, or simply having an honest conversation with a trusted friend. For those of you following this series of inspiring stories, I'm excited to tell you that next week, we'll be featuring Sarah's journey, a tale of resilience in the face of workplace harassment. Her story of standing up against a toxic corporate culture is both eye-opening and empowering. Make sure to tune in. Remember, your engagement helps these stories reach more people who might desperately need to hear them. Like, share, and subscribe to ensure you don't miss any of these powerful narratives of survival and triumph. As I walked away from that house for the last time, fear and hope battled within me. But one thing was clear, I had found my voice again, and this time, no one would silence it. To anyone out there feeling trapped or unheard, your story matters. Your voice matters, and it's never too late to reclaim them both. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Here's to the power of our voices and to the stories yet to be told.